Hey guys, I'm Saurav, and in this video let's talk about mobile photography. Now before I start the video, thank you guys for 50,000 subscribers. That means a lot to me. If you haven't subscribed yet, press the subscribe button below. I will ensure that I make good quality content for you guys. Now as I said, in this video we will talk about mobile photography. Now we always don't have a DSLR or a professional camera with us. And you might not own a DSLR but you like taking images. That doesn't mean you can't take good images just with your mobile phone. In this video, we will see how to combine the mobile camera and amazing techniques and create some amazing images. So without wasting any time, let's get into it. Now, the first thing is shooting macro and bokeh images. Now, when you're shooting macro images, you want the subject to be sharp and you want the background to be blurred, right? So what we are doing is we are switching to manual focus and then we are bringing the focus right to macro from infinity, right? So at macro level, you have the flexibility to keep the subject sharp, but the background will be blurry. So you move your camera until and unless the subject is sharp, and then you get amazing macro images. You can use this technique to not only shoot macro images, but also capture bokeh. So when you're capturing bokeh, you want the light sources to be blurry, right? So place the light sources at a distance and then use the same technique. Keep your focus all the way towards the macro and you will get those amazing blurry bokeh backgrounds. You can also introduce the subject closer to the camera and get these amazing images. So try and experiment with focus and capture amazing macro and bokeh images. Now the second thing is capturing HDR images. So HDR means high dynamic range. So when you have very bright highlights and when you have very dark shadows, it is difficult to capture the details in a single image. When you're seeing it with your eyes, it looks pretty normal, right? But when you're capturing it with a camera, the camera is not able to capture all the details. So we are using a technique known as exposure bracketing. You can also use the HDR feature that comes with your camera app, but that doesn't give so professional results. So in exposure bracketing, we are setting the number of shots and we are also setting the exposure levels. The app we are using is the camera FP5. Again, all the apps we are using in this video, the links will be down in the description below. So the first thing is to set the number of shots, and as I said, the next thing is to set the exposure levels. So the negative side is a darker exposure, the positive side is a brighter exposure, and 0 means a proper optimal exposure. So for example, if you are shooting it at -2, -1, 0, +1 and +2, we are capturing all the way from dark to bright images. We take all these images, combine them in Photoshop and get a single image with details in highlights, in shadows. It looks natural and it looks great. So use exposure bracketing. Just remember, when you're using exposure bracketing, make sure there is some kind of tripod or your hands are pretty stable because you want all the images to be aligned, right? So whenever you feel you have very bright sky and dark foreground, try exposure bracketing and get amazing images. The next thing is shooting time-lapse. Now people believe to shoot time-lapse you need a fancy camera or you need fancy camera gear, but it's not like that. You can shoot amazing time-lapses just with a mobile phone, but here you need a tripod because you can't afford the time-lapse to be shaky, right? So once your mobile phone is set on a tripod, you can use different camera apps to shoot time lapses. Okay, the one we are using, the link will be down in the description below. So here you can set the interval. So interval is basically the time gap between two images. So the idea is to shoot multiple images and then the app will combine those and make a time lapse for you. So you can even shoot raw images if you want to. You can later go home and combine them as a time lapse. If you don't know how to do that, there's a tutorial right here. And then you can also change the resolution, you can change the format, and once you're good to go, once you have fixed the composition, lock down the composition and focus and start shooting, and after a few minutes you will get amazing time lapses. The next thing is composition. Now it doesn't matter what camera you're using, what lens you are using, what mobile phone you are using. If the composition is not good, then there's no point in taking the image. Now, since the mobile phone is so portable, you have the flexibility to play and to experiment with different compositions. You can also use some guidelines like rule of thirds, symmetry, and those guidelines will help you to compose your image. So when you're using rule of thirds, you basically divide the frame into 3 parts, horizontally and vertically, and then you place the subject into any of the 4 intersecting points. You can use symmetry, as I said. Symmetry also looks great. You can also use leading lines, and the overall idea is to experiment with composition in a way that the image looks beautiful and the composition is simple. So make sure you try different composition and you experiment with it, and then you will get good images with your mobile phone. Now the next thing that is my favorite is to shoot in manual mode. Now in manual mode, you have the flexibility to change aperture, shutter speed and ISO in terms of camera. But in mobile phone, unfortunately, the aperture is fixed. So you can only change either shutter speed or ISO or both, okay? So in manual mode, I would recommend not to judge the exposure by seeing the mobile screen because the brightness might affect that. Always use the histogram to view the exposure you're taking. So histogram is a graph which will show you the range of exposures that you have captured. The left part is the shadows, the right part is the highlights, and the middle part is the midtones. So when you are capturing an image, just make sure you're not to the extreme left or you're not to the extreme right, and you're not crossing the boundaries, and the histogram is well spread out in the middle. That will ensure that you get a good exposure. So as I said, you can play with ISO and shutter speed. You can use a slower shutter speed to increase the light, a faster shutter speed to decrease the amount of light. You can increase the ISO to make the image brighter. You can decrease the ISO to make the image darker. Now we will see how to use the manual mode to create some beautiful images. Let's talk about capturing motion and action images and how do we freeze the motion. So when you're capturing action images or something that's very fast moving, you need a faster shutter speed, right? So you can use the burst mode, you can press the shutter button and take many consecutive images, but again here you don't have that flexibility. So you can use the burst mode, select the image that you like, but if you want something that is even more professional, switch to manual mode and use a faster shutter speed. So in this example, we're using something like a 1,000th of a second. Since we are using such a faster shutter speed, we have to increase the ISO in order to compensate for the exposure. So make sure when you're increasing the shutter speed or when you're using a faster shutter speed, I mean, you're shooting under good lighting conditions, right? And once you do that, you have to kind of practice because it might happen that you don't get the right shot at the first time, and then you just take the images and you will see with a faster shutter speed, you can create amazing images with beautiful details all around. The next thing is low light photography and long exposure. So in low light photography, what happens is the image either turns out to be dark or the image turns out to be very grainy, very noisy, and the quality isn't that good. So what we are doing here is we are using a slower shutter speed. And as I said, when you're shooting at slower shutter speeds, the chances of shaking the mobile phone is greater. So we are again recommending to use a tripod. So make sure you are using a tripod and then use a slower shutter speed and set the ISO to 100. So setting the ISO to 100 will ensure that you get the best quality out of your image, right? So in this example, I'm setting the ISO to 100 and I'm using a shutter speed of 30 seconds and I'm taking the image. Now, if I feel the image is too bright, I will dial in a slightly faster shutter speed, like for example 15 seconds, and I will again take the image. And once I'm happy with the exposure, I'm done. It won't only take amazing images, it will help you to even make people disappear in the frame, and you will get beautiful images, sharp images even in low light. That's it from this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, press the like button. If you loved it, press the subscribe button. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.